In 2019, the Medical University of Berlin and the Museum of Anatomy and Embryology in Rolikovo, Amsterdam, solemnly transferred 120 mummified heads of Maori warriors to New Zealand, the indigenous people of the New Zealand Islands. The demand for such collections was incredibly high as commerce began to thrive, and captains of ships setting sail for the Pacific region started placing large orders. To cater to these captains, primarily bound for Australia, a significant market was established in Sydney, Australia, specifically for trading heads. The market square was dedicated to this macabre trade, with human heads displayed in baskets and traded like potatoes. In this video, representatives from the American Smithsonian Institution can be seen returning the heads to the New Zealanders. After 5 years of negotiations, the remains of 4 warriors were finally sent back to their homeland. This process began relatively recently, with active requests for repatriation starting around 20 to 30 years ago, as these remains are essentially the ashes of ancestors. Imagine it's like selling a corpse and having it displayed in a museum, a truly uncivilized practice. Many museums have since cooperated and returned these remains. Look at the Maori elders performing a ritual ceremony to honor the return of 20 of their ancestors' heads to their homeland. The footage was captured in France. However, the local Ministry of Culture had long resisted the export of these remains, which were part of the Natural History Museum's exhibition in Normandy. It is difficult to ascertain how the Maori developed this mummification technique, but its effectiveness and results surpass even that of the Egyptian pharaohs. After undergoing the Maori treatment, the faces of the severed heads would develop a healthy rosy glow, particularly on the cheeks. It was described that the heads appeared much more alive and healthier than they had been on the living person. Mokomokai is the term used to describe the mummified heads of fallen Maori warriors. During battles, their heads were severed and taken as trophies. In the 19th century, European colonizers exported around 600 of these heads as souvenirs, presenting them to their wives and children. From the late 20th century onwards, the New Zealand government launched a campaign to repatriate the Mokomokai to their homeland, doing so discreetly to avoid media sensationalism. But why was this necessary? Was it to put a definitive end to the history of colonialism? Or was it a matter of respect for the ancestors, returning their remains to the earth? Could these dried heads possess mystical powers? Or might they hold information that could threaten an entire nation if revealed? Let's explore these theories. Today, the indigenous Maori people of New Zealand live in small villages across the islands, numbering around 600,000, which is approximately 15% of the total population. Despite their modern appearance, it is hard to believe that just a few centuries ago they were considered the most ferocious cannibals in the world. The Maori have certain epigenetic peculiarities likely due to their historically confined living conditions and constant conflicts, which made them a people ready to defend and attack. The Maori are not inherently cruel or aggressive. They were labeled as such by Europeans who observed in them the ancient human qualities of wild aggression and absolute ferocity. These same Europeans, 500 to 1,000 years before discovering the Maori, engaged in similar behaviors. The enigmatic Maori are not the only mystery. Their origins are also unclear. It is known that the tribe arrived on the islands only in the 13th century, long after the rest of the world had been settled. Were these lands truly uninhabited? There is no written evidence of the islands being inhabited by any people until the arrival of European explorers, specifically British researchers who began excavating burial sites to determine the timeline of human occupation. In the 10th century, the Polynesian navigator Kupe landed on the North Island of New Zealand, naming the land of the Long White Cloud. Something about this place caused him to flee, and upon returning home, he likely shared his experiences with his fellow Polynesians, shocking them so much that for the next 300 years, no one approached the archipelago. Official history states that the Maori were the first inhabitants, and no one disputes this for various reasons. However, there are books in the libraries of New Zealand which I have personally held, written by a researcher who claims otherwise, asserting that there were people living on the islands who were not Maori. According to Maori legends, when the first settlers finally arrived on the islands, they found them already inhabited by supernatural beings called Maera. These beings had matted hair, large teeth with protruding fangs, long bony fingers with sharp claws capable of tearing a person apart. Naturally, to any indigenous people, these Maera were gods or alien-like beings who forced them to change their way of life. Thus, the theme of hostility towards the civilization that existed before them was preserved. In the 17th century, European ships arrived in New Zealand, led by the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman, who gave the country its name, which it still bears today. Zeeland, interestingly, remains one of the provinces of the Netherlands. Upon their arrival, the expedition was met by the aggressive Maori tribes who attacked the foreigners. Several members of the expedition were killed in the skirmish, forcing Tasman to leave the land. In 1769, the next expedition arrived at the islands of New Zealand, this time led by James Cook. This expedition marked the beginning of the English colonization of the archipelago and its indigenous Maori population. Cook was able to showcase the achievements of Western civilization and establish friendly relations with the Maori, reinforced by magical rituals. He aimed to spread Christianity but was also fascinated by their culture and magical practices. There is a theory that the aggressively behaving Maori were, in fact, the mythical Maera, dangerous killers with supernatural abilities. But what happened to the original Polynesian settlers? How and why did one people replace another? The wild humanoid Maera, described in the legends of the New Zealand Aborigines, kept their lands isolated from outsiders for 13 centuries. I believe their strength lay in a form of psychotronic weapon, capable of creating divine terror and influencing the indigenous people at night, forcing them to submit. However, with the development of seafaring and an increase in ships in the ocean, unwanted guests also became more frequent. It is theorized that the Maera monsters retreated into the deep forests, effectively freeing the islands. Fighting off the intruders was becoming increasingly difficult. It was then that the Maori arrived, whom we now consider the indigenous inhabitants of the archipelago.